My name is John Campbell. I'm currently the staff officer on the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest for Rec Engineering Land Special Uses and a handful of other things. I think we're all doing, at least in the Forest Service, multiple jobs these days, it seems like. Um, and just to give you a little history on me, prior to being in this position for about a year now, I was the Southern Region Wilderness and Wild and Scenic River Program Manager based out of Atlanta. And did a lot of wilderness, wild and scenic river work in the southern region. I was on the initial planning team for National Wilderness Skills Institute with Taylor and others, and have long history with the Wilderness Skills Institute, which I think they're calling the Southern Appalachian Wilderness Skills Institute. Clear back from 2010 that we hosted the Cradle of Forestry on the Pisgah National Forest. So. Lots of history with wilderness and wild scenic rivers and skills institutes, all that fun stuff. All that said, I'm a little rusty. I've been doing a lot of stuff with disaster recovery and roads and special uses, things that I hadn't been doing for a long time. So I was glad to get the call from Taylor and James to come do this. So I hope I do a good service. It's been a little while, and we'll just dive right in and like Taylor said, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I can't see that right now, but she'll stop me if needed, or we'll handle them at the end. All right, so our goal today, we're going to talk about outstandingly remarkable values, or ORVs. I'll kind of use those two terms interchangeably throughout the presentation, depending on the context, and how they fit into the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, explore their importance, and how we document those and how we basically explain and create those. So we'll start off with the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, signed in 1968 by President Lyndon Johnson. The act preserves select U.S. rivers with outstanding natural, cultural, and recreational values in a free-flowing condition. It establishes our nation's strongest river protection policy, permanently prohibiting new dams and federal actions that would negatively alter a river's flow or water quality. Pictured on the left there are the Craighead brothers, who were critical pioneers in getting the act designated. If you don't know about them, I encourage you to check out their story. It's really interesting how they got involved and what their background was. So it's a really neat story. And then, the Wild and Scenic River Act was part of that suite of environmental and kind of conservation acts passed in the 60s and 70s, including the Wilderness Act, Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act, Clean Water, National Historic Preservation Act, NEPA, National Trail System Act. As our nation was realizing the importance of protecting our national resources and finding balance with development and use. So that was the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was part of that suite of things. And just as a statement of policy, right in the beginning of the Act, Section 1B, it's hereby declared to be the policy of the United States that certain selected rivers of the nation shall be preserved in a free-flowing condition, and that they and their immediate environment shall be protected for the benefit and enjoyment of present and future generations. So for probably most people on the call, whether you're agency personnel or other, this benefit of enjoyment in future generations is really a key component of a lot of what we do, that we wanted to have a similar experience, and we manage it to be in perpetuity for, our grandchildren's grandchildren. So a very important part that hits a lot of our key law and policy out there. So a bit of the intent behind the Wild and Scenic River Act. Early 20th century technology of harnessing our natural resources led to really an unchecked construction of dams across the United States. So as part of that, in the Wild and Scenic River Act states, the Congress declares that the established national policy of dam and other construction at appropriate sections of the rivers of the United States needs to be complemented by a policy that would preserve other selected rivers or sections thereof in their free-flowing condition to protect the water quality of such rivers and to fulfill other vital national conservation purposes. So it really was intended to be a counterpoint to all of the dam construction that had occurred once that technology kind of was harnessed for power generation and flood prevention and recreation. And just because I was kind of curious, and it's always fun to use AI a little bit these days, I did a quick search, and between 1900 and 1960, it said there were 50,000 to 60,000 dams built across our country. And with the National Dam Inventory now showing there are a total of 92,000 dams in our country. Most of those are probably smaller to moderate size, not the size of these large, landscape altering dams that we've seen, but that was a big number that shocked me when I looked it up. So um, gives a little context. Uh, a little more context here, just of kind of a graphic of the system itself. 3.5 millions of rivers and streams in the United States. About a quarter of those, give or take, 860,000 miles are dammed, dredged, or channelized, and 13,466 miles are part of the Wild and Scenic River system. Um, so I've had this, I think the first time I was the recipient of this presentation, the question was asked, do you think we've complemented our policy of dam construction? Has any kind of equity been achieved? And you can make those determinations on your own. But we're under 0.5% of our streams in this country being designated as a wild and scenic river. So we might have some work to do, but that's okay. Also, you can see the distribution of the program on the map here. The Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Oregon, those Northern Rockies and Alaska really have a preponderance of the system. When you look, into the middle part of the country and the east and south, where higher development, a lot more people, there just wasn't a lot of opportunities for free flowing rivers after all the development that happened in the earlier this century, early 20th century. And I realized I was going through this on my last couple of run throughs that this might be a little bit Forest Service centric, and I apologize for that for those that may, manage being another agency or, recreate or looking for broader information on the overall system. But those are the stats that I have from my previous position. But the Forest Service manages 129 rivers. I believe the overall system is 228. So the Forest Service has approximately 60%. We have about 5,000 stream miles, which is just under 40% of the system. So you can see we have more rivers, but less miles. That's probably a representation of a lot of what's going on up in Alaska. But we have 56 national forests represented in 21 states, including Puerto Rico. The total system has 41 states. So this is a very broad program across a lot of different places. And we have about 1.5 million acres in the corridors that are protected around those wild and scenic rivers. Let's see, just one little added thing from the Wild and Scenic River Act. Congress classifies each river and potential segment into one of three different classifications. They're wild, scenic, and recreational. You can see what the descriptions are of there. They are based on what exists today, not what might be desired in the future. So at the time of designation, a wild segment should have no impoundments and none or very limited access from road or trails. Scenic is free from impoundments as well and limited access. And then recreational is where you're going to see more road and trail access and usually some recreation sites. These classification systems also have some other requirements I wasn't going to get into too deep with mining and some water rights stuff and minimum flows, but not going to get into those too deep right now. So our Wild and Scenic River Act, our agency mandate as Forest Service and all managing agencies is to protect and enhance, not preserve. So for those that might be a little bit of a wilderness nerd like I am, the agency mandate in the Wilderness Act is to preserve wilderness character, and preservation is to maintain or to keep. And our clear mandate in the Wild and Scenic River Act is to protect, which kind of has that preserve, maintain feel, but also enhance. Our management agency mandate is to enhance the values that these rivers were designated for. And we'll go right into what those are. That is, the intent is for threefold purposes of the rivers they are designated are free flowing water, free flow, water quality, and those outstandingly remarkable values, also known as ORVs. Collectively, these three things are known as river values, which can kind of get a little bit confusing with outstandingly remarkable values. Um, and I'll try to use them very clearly. But if you have questions on those, river values as a whole is when you're speaking about these three particular qualities. And then we have outstandingly remarkable values as a separate one of those things. We'll talk just briefly about what those are. Free flow, kind of common sense definition here. Um, Requirement means the river remains undammed, unobstructed, and without artificial channelization. There is a component of natural hydrology and the biodiversity and connectivity that goes along with that. Um, and there's no riprapping or other modification of that waterway. A very clear definition and one of the key requirements of the Wild and Scenic River Act to be included in the system. So water quality, I'm not going to hit on too much here. This is almost kind of like a byproduct in my mind, oftentimes, of the protections the other two parts of the river values give us with free flow and the ORVs. Uh, but water quality is very important. Tear it back to our mandate of protect and enhance. There's probably very few places in this country that wouldn't benefit by enhancing of the water quality. Uh, there are some stats that surprisingly high percentage, maybe in the neighborhood of half of all wild and scenic rivers in the Forest Service system are considered impaired to some degree. And some of the top key things that we work on with water quality in this system is temperature, climate change. It's changing that stuff that has broad reaching impacts. Mercury and other metals, sediment, the pH, nutrients, stuff for a lot of point source pollution, non-point source. Here in the Southeast, we have a lot of issues with septic systems that feed that non-point source location. So it's a very important thing. We're not going to talk about it a bunch here, but I always tie that one back to our mandate is to enhance. And there's a big monitoring component as well that we can do from a stewardship perspective with water quality for wild and scenic river management. And now what we kind of came here for, which was outstandingly remarkable values. Hereby declared to be the policy of the United States that certain selected rivers and their environments possess outstandingly remarkable scenic, recreational, geologic, fish, and wildlife, historic, cultural, or other similar values. Hence, this is right from Section 1B of the Act. Outstandingly remarkable values is where we get this term that has been, rolled into policy and law as to how we manage and what our mandates are to manage these rivers. So just a quick little summary here of what was contained in the act. So scenery. These are going to be highly diverse, visually attractive, and harmonious natural landscapes. It's going to vary widely. All these are very different from river to river, but it could be sheer rock cliffs, dramatic seasonal foliage, just the winding of the river. A variety of things will feed into a scenery ORV. Next is recreation. This is going to be like world-class opportunities for water-related activities, boating, fishing, backcountry hiking, and or any kind of specialized recreation that might be specific to a particular river. I want to make a really quick note on these two ORVs, scenery and recreation, and tie it back to the classification system that I mentioned that was contained in the Act a few slides ago. These are two kind of separate things and have different functions in how we manage this stuff. A scenery ORV does not necessarily need to be in a scenic classification system of a river, and vice versa. A scenery classification doesn't need to have a scenery ORV, and it goes for recreation as well. They have the same exact word and terminology, but have different functionality. So you might have a recreational stretch of a river that has a lot of access, but it might only have non-recreation ORVs. They do overlap all the time. I just wanted to make sure that that distinction was clear on those two different parts of the system. A little confusing there with terminology. Geology. This is distinctive, exemplary, or rare geologic features such as fossil beds, caves, or unique rock formations. By the nature of there being a river in most places, there's probably some kind of topography or a canyon involved. In most cases, not every single one. So you just can't have, exposed rock as part of that doesn't qualify as an ORV. They got to be pretty distinctive and getting into the details of why it's so unique in this area. Um, Next is fish and or wildlife, which we'll hit on. This can be exceptional populations, critical habitats for endangered species, remarkably high species diversity in areas, and this goes for fish and or wildlife. In the act, it's kind of lumped together, and the term fish and wildlife goes hand in hand with a lot of management work, I suppose. Um, but a lot of times you'll see the ORV separated now. A fish ORV does not necessarily mean a fish and wildlife ORV. So they could be separate. And I've seen both ways, but um, those don't have to be lumped together. Next would be history. And this one kind of focuses more on the sites or physical remnants that have some kind of historical significance. Just by the little on the slide here, that's thinking like cabins. These are structures, these are things that are a tangible physical thing that could be there. Um, but then somewhat related to is cultural, and this is different. This is traditional use sites, even prehistorical artifacts, and the landscape tied to Native American homelands and the things that happened there, and potentially even early pioneer heritage. But this one is more focused on. I always think of more traditional use Native American things. And then, if you remember in the act, the very last thing is that other similar values. There could be a handful of variety of other things that could be an ORV that's determined most likely locally or through the Congressional Act. Those could be the hydrology could be very unique, botanical, um, paleontological, paleontology, we'll say. I couldn't even get through that word in my prep going through this. Paleontology, dinosaurs. Or other scientific values. I believe there was a river that, through a recent planning process, had an ORV of night skies to where it was so unique the visual of the stars and the night sky there. So it can be a handful of different things. All right, we're going to dig into a little bit more about ORVs and getting into a little more specific stuff about them. So why? Why do we have ORVs? Well, the Act says we have to have at least one. That's a requirement for it to be part of the Wild Scenic River system. So once we know what that is, that whether it's geology or any other ones we just went through, we need to know what they are, where they're located. We need to identify and understand those in order to manage it as well. So you just can't, we always say, well, what are the ORVs on your river? Well, I've got these two, or I've got, four. But we've got to know specifically what they are and dig in a little bit further as to what that is. And it's going to be different for each river. Um, like I said, it's the act only requires one, but oftentimes there are multiple. And it's important to note too, like on the longer stretches of rivers, the ORVs can change in different segments. Like say you have a 50-mile uh, designated river, it might be broken up into say 5 different stretches that go from like wild to scenic to recreational and back to scenic, based upon some of those criteria like access and rec sites and other things. And then the ORVs might be different within those different classifications and those different segments. That's not uncommon. There could be a lot of consistency, but it's not a requirement. Um, and just go back to remembering that our goal is to protect and enhance. So it ties us to our management of what we're trying to do. So protect and enhance, and then which also important part of that, the flip side of protect and enhance is it prevents degradation of any kind. We've got these dates of designation, and we should at minimum be maintaining, but we definitely don't want to degrade, and we should be trying to enhance. All right, rivers should, or ORVs, excuse me, must be river related, unique, rare, or exemplary, and within the region of comparison. We're going to dive into those just a little bit more here. All right, river related. Basically, for something to be an ORV, it must owe its existence to the presence of the river. Um, they are usually located within the river or its immediate shorelands, or within the corridor that's designated as part of that quarter mile on either side. Um, they contribute substantially to the function of the river ecosystem. They are river dependent, is a good way to look at this. Um, and this is a difficult concept to sometimes put into application as you are determining these, because when you get on a river, everything about these rivers seems special, from the recreation part to the fisheries to the scenery. You know, I get to most rivers in a natural setting. I'm like, man, this is beautiful. What makes it so special that it's going to be an ORV? So it takes some time and some practice to learn how to understand what that breakdown is. So just a few examples. For it to be river related, the features are tied directly to the water, not something you would see from like an overlook a couple miles away, where you have this broad landscape vision. It's more tied to if you're on the water specifically, or within that corridor. Um, for recreation, like it's something that's attracts visitors from around the country, whitewater rafting and boating, for example. Um, on the fish and wildlife, it has that threatened and endangered species that rely on that river for their critical habitat. And those are just a couple of examples that we can dig into further. Let's see, unique, rare, or exemplary. Uh, These are fairly self-explanatory definitions, but unique, one of a kind, is unequal. Only class 5 rapid in the region. Sole habitat for a listed species. Um, Rare means that it's uncommon, unusual, or occurring infrequently. Um, Well-preserved site of historic riverfront settlement. Those are not very common when you're out and about. So exemplary, it serves as a model, the best of its kind. Uh, Significant or conspicuous example among the best of its kind representative. So these are kind of very high standards that we need when we're describing and developing these ORVs. All right, region of comparison. This was that third thing that we have to think about whenever developing ORVs. Um, the region of comparison is identified by the interdisciplinary team that is working on whatever planning process we are going through to do this. And it's going to be by each category. It should be scaled at an appropriate level for the type of river being evaluated, large enough to encompass similar type rivers that provide a wide representation of our values, but the right size to avoid skewed comparisons. You know, we're kind of in that Goldilocks realm. You don't want it too small to where everything is an ORV and everything is, unique and rare and exemplary, but you don't want it so big that everything is not an ORV, if that makes sense. You got to find that right scale to do this. And for each ORV, the region of comparison can be different. It's a process that goes through a lot of iterations and conversations. I've been a part of 2 planning processes that went through this, and it takes a lot of input from interdisciplinary members and subject matter experts to really hone in on what that region of comparison is. And this might give you a little bit better visual of that. On the upper one, you've got the physiographic regions of kind of the Western U.S., where you've got mountains, you got plateaus, the Great Plains, a variety of different things. Those could be the level of regional comparison you're looking at, or something like the lower one, where you're looking at a watershed potentially, or a larger level watershed. I'm not a hydrologist, but they would say, here's that's similar and what's unique about these things. Um, uh, so yeah, it could be by state, it could be by national forest, hydrologic unit, um, regions associated with youth. It could be traditional indigenous use, population served by recreation opportunities, a species range, those types of things. Um, Ultimately, what is most important is that the region identified serve as a meaningful comparative reference point um, for that particular ORV and what how it's viewed in other rivers and other locations in there to analyze if it's going to be, if a specific river ORV rises up to be that, or a specific value rises up to be an ORV. All right, this is kind of a little bit of a clunky slide. I'll go through it quickly. This is just a little bit of a flow chart explaining kind of how we arrive at what's an ORV. So is it present in the river corridor? No. Resource is unlikely to be in an ORV. If it's a yes, yeah, you move on to the next question. Is it river related, and or does it need river or corridor to exist? No, it's unlikely. If it's a yes, it's a unique is a unique, rare, or exemplary within the region of comparison. Nope, resources unlikely. So it has to be all three of those in order to move us to this yes place of, okay, we can move on now. Resources and ORV. If you're missing one of those three categories that we just talked about, you're kicking it out of that ORV discussion. And it says here, you're going to document what you find, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. Is it flow or water quality dependent? No, you end right there. If it is a yes, which we didn't talk a lot about this, you got to describe the flows, but we'll talk about that here in just a minute. If it is flow dependent or water quality dependent, we'll describe that in the ORV description. All right, ORV determinations. It's it starts with an interdisciplinary team, like I said, of resource experts, subject matter experts, using their professional judgment, research, other examples, reaching out to other people in their field that might know best available science to support their recommendation. Um, in addition to that, this is a public process, regardless of which approach you take. General public participation, as well as seeking tribal input, and then other stakeholders with state, federal, local agencies. Usually, the states have a you know significant role in managing waterways in their state, and they're going to have input on this. And then there's always going to be interested groups. And stakeholders, partners when it comes to the Forest Service, about how we're going to develop these and what they are. That could be like a Trout Unlimited, or it could be a friends group of the river. It could be an outfitter guide community. You're going to want to be working with all of them when you do this. All right, so writing ORVs. I'm going to be honest here. I have never written an ORV, but I tried to dig into this a little bit to see if I could provide some good information and background on what this is. So, um, why is writing these important? Um, you know, let's say in 5, 10, 20 years from now, when you are going through a planning process, whether that's comprehensive river management planning or forest plan revision or a management plan of some kind, um, you spend a long time writing it, doing the public participation. You want to make sure that your process and some background is provided as part of that. You just don't want to say, oh, the so and so river has recreation and geology as its ORVs and have no background as to how that was determined and what that actually means at the time of designation. It's really important. So um, you want to be specific and tangible and detailed, and you want to avoid kind of generalizations and words that don't have strong meaning to them, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Because these things inform management, they inform monitoring of the river and other values that are happening out there. So like we talked about leading up to this point, how is the value river related? You really need to explain that, because it sounds very simple, but you need to dig in a little bit further on that as to how it's river related. How is it unique or exemplary within the region of comparison? That really gets into significance. Are we rising to that level of, this is where you want to describe it. You don't want to say, it's got good whitewater rafting. You're going to say it's got world class. You're going to say it has the best, class 5, or it's got the longest stretch. All these types of qualifiers that help you explain how it meets this level of being an ORV. How would you measure that value compared to the values on other rivers? This is an important one that will help you down the road when you're doing management and monitoring stuff, is because those can be both quantitative or qualitative. Not everything is going to have a quantitative measure to it, but if there is a quantitative measure, it's a great thing to throw in here so that, yeah, it's got 82 species of fish in this river. I'm just making this up right now. Very key thing that shows a high level of biodiversity or something like that. And then this last bullet kind of is what it all kind of comes down to. Why would someone care about this? Take special notice. You really want to lean into writing this in a way that's going to catch people's eye. Like say they haven't been there. I want to go see this because of this ORV description and what it looks like. And below is just a random example. That's just from a quick search. I'm not sure that one's tied to a specific river, but and it would be longer than that, but that's just an excerpt from a potential or from a ORV. And just to continue with that on the writing ORVs, what aspects of the value can future river managers examine and know what is being maintained? So this is getting into building on monitoring, and how you're going to do that. That's where a little quantitative, but some specific examples that I found, like on the Middle Fork, it provides cold water habitat. I underline that, a lot goes along with cold water habitat, especially in the context of climate change and how things and water quality, how things are changing. You can actively measure that. And high genetic diversity, which we talked about. We should be able to, without hatchery influence, very clear distinction that this fishery is important because it's not being, supplemented with hatchery stuff. Very important key thing that I would think is an easy thing to manage and monitor into the future. What resource conditions are necessary for continued existence of this value? I put this one with the horse pasture, high concentration of mosses and liverworts. But the spray zone of the waterfalls is what makes these unique wetlands. And they need that condition to have this high concentration of these unique mosses and liverworts. So just kind of an interesting connection. I tried to find a couple of those. That third bullet, outcomes and experiences of river users. That's a clear connection to me to the recreational use. But you should be very clear what the outcome, what the expectation is, because I know there are rivers in the system where this third thing that I have here, encounters with our visitors are rare, offering high quality opportunities for solitude. Facilities are designed to blend seamlessly with the environment. There are some rivers where the goal is to have a more solitude-like experience, and others where you're going to be at a highly developed boat launch, with dozens and dozens of other people as you're getting into commercial outfitter and guide boats. Very different things, and you should set what those expectations are. And in addition to that current condition and, things that we're monitoring and managing is those desired future conditions. Each of these should have, how are we trying to enhance? What are we trying to go towards? What are we trying to recover potentially from an endangered species standpoint? we should have those desired future conditions built into these ORVs. That kind of is that full connection of current condition, what are we managing and monitoring, and how are we going to make things better? So I've mentioned it a couple of times. How do we do this in these planning processes? Sorry, this is a little Forest Service specific, but there's two basic processes. That would be through our forest plan revision process. This is where, as part of that thing, we identify what rivers are eligible, and it goes through some core screens that I'll hit here in a minute. Or we go through the comprehensive river management plan process. So that would be after designation. And basically, the law that designates a river will say, within a certain time frame, please create a CRMP. And that at that time, you'll have the opportunity to see what was in the legislation, clarify the ORVs, write them more specifically, and make changes if necessary. So here is an overly simple graphic of the process. First, you determine eligibility. Although it's not required, a lot of rivers should be eligible to be in the system before they're designated. But I always say Congress can do whatever they want. But usually eligibility is determined first. For the Forest Service, that would be free flowing and one ORV. I think that's all rivers. As part of that eligibility, you get preliminary classifications. That would be recreational, scenic, or wild. Then potentially do a suitability study about the recommendation to put it into the system, and then designation. Systematic inventory. So you'll use this initial core screen applied to all rivers on a quad map that meet that level of flow requirements normally. If you already had an inventory, you would just kind of document that and add any rivers that needed to be added, or any that have changed circumstances. I just had a little light bulb go off. There is a national rivers inventory, I believe. That would be a good place to start on some of those things, and you can go check out your area or your rivers on that. So eligibility, like I mentioned, it must be free flowing and possess at least one ORV. And this is in the context of Forest Service planning processes. So once you've identified those, they do not vary across all alternatives. So it's very important that eligibility just says they meet these two basic criteria. They are not up for discussion, which is kind of cool because once they're eligible, that reserves some certain management requirements, and I'll get into those in just a minute. So very core screen for how we go about that, at least on National Forest System land. You'll get that preliminary classification as part of that, based upon an interdisciplinary review and the Forest Plan Process, or CRMP. And then the final classification would be determined by Congress or during the CRMP process. Then suitability, this is really what is a further analysis that provides basis for determining whether to recommend designation to Congress. It applies a set of factors or criteria to answer in the suitability study. Should these values be protected? They were identified. It's eligible. It has ORVs, but we're gonna dive a little bit deeper. Should we protect these? Is Wild and Scenic River designation the best method to protect them? And then the third one is kind of manageability, is making sure that all parties that might have an interest in this particular river, because there's a lot of times private land involved or state land mix, that there is some manageability and demonstrated commitments to be a part of this and manage this appropriately. This can be completed during forest planning or deferred to another time. So oftentimes these either eligible or suitable wild and scenic rivers are called candidate rivers. There's 934 river segments. I believe that's in the Forest Service, over 14,000 miles. That's a bunch, which is really cool to see. One of the important parts, like I mentioned before, is once you have an eligible or a suitable river, there are some interim protection measures assigned to those through our policy that really give some strong protections so that management activities will not prevent future designation down the road. And it's broken down by program area, like what can you do from a mining perspective, from road construction or other things. It's all broken down in there. So if you do have some eligible, suitable rivers out there, I encourage you to go dig into that a little bit. You can see the Forest Service handbook reference there. And then a proposed project with the potential to adversely affect river values of an eligible river will automatically trigger a suitability study, which will then help inform that decision about the project and the future status of that river. And then that last step is designation. Most common path is through an act of Congress. However, there is another path depending on your state. A governor can formally request that the Secretary of Interior add the river to the system. It just must have already been protected under state law as a wild, scenic, or recreational river. All right. That's what I have about things. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you so much, John. And it was really great to see you again and reconnect, and really so interesting. ORVs are such a special part of wild and scenic rivers. So really appreciate that. It was a great presentation. Thank you. Thanks everybody
Thanks
for
so much.
coming.